somebody with Jabber? Anybody have Jabber? Yeah, you're gonna talk, so you're. All right, that's cool.
So who will be note taker?
Brooke is gonna.
Brooke. Okay.
Brooke is gonna take that.
Okay. Thank you. And
There is an ether tab.
Yeah.
You can type right into that. You will find it linked from the agenda.
And do the chairs have Jabber on? Are you using Chromebook?
we have
If one of you can get on Jabber, all you need to do is channel
We have
people. And,
Meet Echo, but I don't
Imitaker, yes.
yeah.
I don't actually have Jabber.
And so there are blue sheets, so circulating somewhere. So on agenda, work group document status update. Then we have 20 minutes presentation from Loganathan about the deprecation of using TLS old versions for email. And so his draft describes some particular changes on the RFC to be made, so that it is true. So he will present it remotely. Then we have 20 minutes discussion about a situation around the ISG evaluation of required TLS draft. There are two discuss points from security area directors that working group seem not to agree with. So we have to make some progress about this. And 10 minutes open mic that will probably be replaced with another presentation if Hannes is managed to be on time here. So
we have, as you can see, we have document review. As Valerie said, we have a document in last call, and then we have a single document in sort of initial state. Our ISG queue document required TLS. We need a little bit of work there, but we're comfortable. I think we're gonna sort of get that done. And then we have this draft IETF UTA TLS for email. Now after that, as you can see, there's nothing. We've got Hannes proposing some stuff. We've got some other proposed documents, but none of them have been accepted as working group documents yet, right? So at some point, some of these may actually approach us and say we want to be working group documents, but we're not actually there yet. So this working group exists in a perpetual state of sort of almost done. And whether we actually get to done, it's anybody's guess at this point. But,
well, at least you got some things done in the past, so that's not.
Yeah, you can see we had some RFCs. Yeah, we've done some work. All right. I think with that we maybe switch over to Loganden's draft IETF UTA TLS for email. So if you get on the queue, Loganden, remotely in Meet Echo. There we go. Let's see here. And
can you guys hear me?
We can.
Oh, good.
And just I don't know whether you can switch slides. I think you actually have to tell me to switch slides.
Oh, okay. Yeah. Please, can you please switch slides for me? Okay. Thank you very much. So basically, the draft is about deprecating TLS 1.0 and 1.1 based on the similar draft that was submitted by Stefan and I think it was Kathleen to the TLS working group. So this one is specific to email services. So what I did basically, Stefan and I, we went through the RFC 8314 and then replaced 1.0 and 1.1 with 1.2 as minimum. That's basically as a recommended version. So, and then I started getting feedback on the draft itself. Next slide, please. So I've been collecting some of those comments because change the scope of a draft. So one of the first comment was about addressing the outstanding erratum. That was by Jim Fenton. The second is update the reference to MTA STS. And the third point that included was possibly include reference to required TLS, especially for message submission. And then I also got feedback from Julien Hélier, saying instead of using the language TLS 1.0 and things like that, just follow BCP 195. This one, I'm not sure I quite agree with the comment, personally. And then there was Keith Moore, who included a fairly long comment. It was about whether we should encourage MUA and implementation to possibly warn the users about the minimum confidentiality levels that email services, the presently deployed email services already provide, or whether we could have something like, even if it supports TLS 1.1 or 1.0, we have profiles for ciphers. So this comment came twice, one in a private email and then one on the mailing list by Keith. It's providing security warnings to MUA. And that's basically it. So those are all the feedbacks that we've got, Stefan and I, on the document. And if you look at it, it changes the scope of the draft in a sense. Next slide, please. So the original aim when writing the draft was about TLS 1.0 and 1.1 deprecation for email services. My question now is more to the working group of whether the other points that were mentioned or change the scope should be included within the draft. And if so, I would request feedback on how to do it, or whether we should have different internet draft to address different issues, basically. So those are two of my basic questions that I have for the working group.
So I just want to make a procedural comment here, right, as chair. So when we accept a draft as a working group draft, right, we turn change control over to the working group. But there's always sort of a balance here. There's an underlying assumption that the draft that you started out with is winds up in the same sort of area, same sort of ballpark as the one you have. So you can't like have at least like it would be problematic, right? Or at least it would require very strong consensus, I think, from the working group to make a radical change of direction for a draft, right? So if you started out with a draft that said, all right, let's just make two things historic, and then we have very weak consensus for making a major change, I think we have to have like clear consensus from the working group. In that case, it's not a problem, right? But we really need clear consensus from the working group to make a change that like make major changes to a working group document.
I definitely agree.
Alexei Melnikov. I think I'm probably speaking from the floor as opposed to speaking as area director. Don't have a full opinion about exactly what needs to be included. As an implementer, I would like probably some clarifications on cipher suits used. However, one thing probably decide up early on is whether this applies to client-server bit of email, like talking to your submission server, talking to your IMAP server, or whether it applies to server part, because they historically sometimes have different requirements. So, like, for example, the question about whether to update MTA STS, if this applies to server bit, then the answer might be yes. If it doesn't, then it's out of scope, maybe separate document.
Right. This is why it's a little bit, so you start out with one assumption for a working group document and you wind up somewhere completely different, right? Yeah.
And the reason why this assumption, I initially made the assumption this only applies to client to server part because of the document it's trying to update, which was limited to client to server parts. I'm not saying it's wrong to update, server to server, but I think you need to very clearly state, which way you want to go.
So, Alexei, before you step down, are you expressing the opinion as an individual that this document should be about client to server rather than MTA to MTA?
Well, it might be harder to achieve consensus on both client to server and server to server. If we can achieve the same consensus on both, then a single document is fine. But if we can't, I would rather concentrate on client to server first, and then again,
I mean, I guess what I'm worried about as chair in this working group is sort of, do we have enough energy to sort of pursue all avenues, right? And making a clear and concise scope for a document like this increases the chances that people will review it and actually have consistent opinions about it, right? Otherwise, we risk winding up with a document with a lot of text, nobody reviewed it.
I see your point. I think, to be fair, this is 5-page document for now. So it's probably not going to be a big deal.
Right,
but
for now, let's just,
Yeah,
I'm
exactly.
wary about feature creep
I
here.
know, absolutely.
Can you speak louder, please? I'm not sure I hear you from remote.
Okay. Well, okay. So personal opinion, I would like to solve both. Whether they're in the same document or not, I don't know. If we cannot solve both in the same document, I would rather concentrate on client server bit.
All right. In that case, what I think I would like to give you some guidance, Loganandan. If try to slice up your comments into two pies, right? The stuff that you consider to be non-controversial / editorial, right? You can, I think, sort of make a new version with that, and then you do a single post per each other issue, and we'll try to get consensus on each of them, right? But where we don't have enough people answering, that thing will have to go, right? We can't go into the document. We have to have the working group consensus on each of these points in order to make the changes. Does that make sense?
I definitely agree. That makes total sense.
All right. So I think just backing up. How are we for time? So, I mean, if somebody wants to speak to any of these particular points, right? You've seen them on the mailing list. We have face-to-face time.
And if you haven't been paying enough attention, can chairs open each link and maybe we can have a look? Sorry, just, making chairs do work.
Well, Alexei, just one question to you as AD. So the chairs received some request from art area directors to add milestones. And we've added a milestone for this very document, but it isn't approved yet. So it is a question for you as our responsible area director.
And that's excellent. You just sort of gave him work back.
I actually asked him to remind me, so that's a good time. Thank you.
All right. So, I mean, so this is one of the issues. From Jim, there's another one. Oh man, yes, it opened the same link. Yeah. There we go. Yeah, they're the same issue. Yeah, right. So that's That's one of the comments. That's one of the threads. So it's actually a little bit difficult to display these things in the room. I think we have to rely on people being up to speed on this. But it's like, does anybody have like thing they want to talk about around any of these issues? Like, we have 5 more minutes maybe to spend on this, and then we have to move on. Otherwise, I think Logan and you like try to get consensus. We try to push for consensus on each of these things individually, but apply them only as we reach consensus. And if you're unsure about that, just reach out to the chairs, and sort of we'll help you like push on the mailing list to like get to consensus or not.
Okay, thank you very much. I think that's it for me, and thank you for the 2 people who spoke on the queue. Other mic.
All right, thank you. I'm gonna disconnect you now. All right.
So the next item is a discussion around the situation of ISG evaluation of required TLS draft. So probably Jim will start the discussion.
Okay, hi, I'm Jim Fenton. Good morning. This is really to talk about the required TLS draft that's currently in IESG review and has 2 discussed positions, and I'd like to talk about those and how we plan on resolving them. Next slide.
Oh, I guess I have a actually.
We double-clicked, okay. Good. So make a few changes, and basically, you know, some of them are just editorial, but a few of them are things that I don't think are going to be problematic, but I think from a procedure standpoint, we want to make sure that we have working group consensus on those. One of them is actually, I like this change because it had made the draft a little bit hard to read, because we had both an SMTP extension called require TLS, which I put in all capital letters, and we had a header field called require TLS, which I put in mixed case. And if people didn't notice the cases, it was a little bit hard to follow. So there was a suggestion in IESG review that we make the header field declarative rather than an imperative, so it makes it TLS required. And of course, there's a hyphen there because header fields can't have embedded spaces in their names. So I'm planning on changing the name of the header field from require TLS to TLS required. Still takes 1 mandatory argument, which is no. There was some language in there about bounce messages, and it was sort of complicated and perhaps a little bit confusing in terms of whether you paid attention to require TLS for a bounce message, or really any message for which the mail from address was null. And we decided that there was no longer a need to do that. If you were sending a bounce message and you wanted and you didn't want require TLS on it, you just didn't specify it. There wasn't a special rule there. I have yet to write a better description of re-originated messages. The draft currently describes basically just mailing lists as one of the situations where a message is received that might be received with require TLS, and it originates a new message and talks about the situations that, you know, the mailing list might really want to, I forget the exact wording, so I'm faking it here, but that the mailing list might want to turn on require TLS for the message that it originates as well. But it was pointed out in IESG review that there are a lot of other situations besides mailing lists where messages are re-originated. Vacation messages, for example, that come back is one, and that one may be a little bit tricky because that one has to do with basically a user program that gets executed that might not have visibility into the require TLS status of the incoming message. Civ is another example where Civ can cause messages to be originated as a result. So not just mailing lists there. So I need to come up with and socialize some new language yet on these sorts of messages that happen as a result of a message that might have require TLS on it. And Barry's standing up.
And Barry is standing up, and Barry is speaking. Perhaps this has been discussed, and I haven't been following the discussion very closely, but the bounce messages bother me a little bit because sometimes bounce messages are just saying your message didn't get delivered and have reason headers and stuff, but sometimes they include the message. Right, some of them include the full message. Even if they include the headers, not using TLS is exposing those. But especially if they include the full message, we have that issue. And yeah, as you said, Civ redirect is a big thing. Are we comfortable with not requiring require TLS to be propagated to those?
So with respect to bounce messages, there is actually language in the draft that says that the bounce messages should not, if you send a bounce message that doesn't have require TLS on it, that you should be doing ret equals headers. So it does address that. There's some, of course, there's concern there on putting require TLS on the return, because the return path, just because the forward path does require TLS, doesn't mean the return path
why
does.
it's problematic. I just want to make sure that there's strong language in there saying that if the message came in with require TLS, you better not expose stuff on the way back on the bounce message.
Yes.
And with Civ
is tough because Civ, just like vacation messages, is tough because that really happens on the user side of things, and the require TLS status of the message, which is really since it's an SMTP option, it isn't necessarily visible to the Civ agent.
There are some implementations of Civ that are entirely client side, and the client side decides what to do with the message, and you can't really do anything about that. But if the Civ script simply tells the server what to do, then I think we should say that the server must propagate the require TLS state to the result of the Civ script.
Okay. I'm not particularly well versed in Civs, so I might be looking for some help on that, Barry, if you can.
I'm sure we can, between me and Barry, we can help.
Yeah. Thanks.
There are also quite common cases when Civ is being executed by LMTP server. So hopefully if you propagate option applies to LMTP, then, but you still need to update your Civ implementation, which is not something people might be thinking about, right? When
yes.
Documents.
That's why we put stuff like that in the document.
Just to relate from Jabber, Ned Fried says, any expectation that you're going to be able to influence the behavior of agents who assume ownership of the message by changing the envelope from is unrealistic. Don't quite know what it means, but
yes, and that's true. And so, while you're in SMTP, require TLS can determine if the receiving agent is implementing require TLS and not send it the message if it isn't, and so that's handled. But once it gets passed to some sort of a user agent, then all bets are off.
Ned Fried again. The problem with Civ is that it can be executed anywhere from just before delivery to long after.
Yes. Okay. So these are the things that there are a few editorial things like the spacing and the name of the extension and so forth. I am really impressed with the level of detail and of the reviews from IESG. They have so much stuff to read. So it's pretty amazing. Next slide. Oh, that's right. I keep forgetting I have a clicker here. Okay, so one thing that the chairs and I had discussed, and there is some concern about the TLS required new name header field. That basically the goal here is for TLS required to provide an exception to policy mechanisms that might be advertised by the recipient, like by Dane and by MTA STS. And there are a couple different ways of looking at those exception mechanisms. I tend to look at them as sort of an advertisement that sort of says, when you connect to this server, you should expect that we can do that we're doing TLS. And you should expect to be able to negotiate start TLS, and perhaps even tell you what the certificates look like there. In the case of Dane, especially, and so, and I think there's a couple of different viewpoints about how much of a requirement that is. What this proposed new section for the security consideration is basically to document the fact that, yes, we're asking for an exception to what Dane and MTA STS are suggesting, encouraging, not exactly mandating, because they do still accept messages generally that don't have that don't have start TLS turned on. That would be a different mechanism. It's perfectly okay for them to just plain refuse to accept messages unless you've negotiated start TLS first. They typically don't do that. So because of that, that's why I kind of say it's an encouragement rather than a requirement. And so the idea of TLS required no is to allow messages through, for example, to tell the administrator that, hey, you've got a misconfiguration, if, hey, you've got a misconfiguration. So this paragraph is just a first draft of something that we might say about that in the security considerations, at least to get that out in the open.
This is Barry. First, an error in this is TLS required no header field represents an explicit decision on the part of the sender not to require TLS, not
Yes.
to use TLS. So that needs to be fixed.
That is correct.
But the other thing is, of course, that there's a conflict between saying TLS required no on the sender end and simply having, and MTA STS is having a server that will not talk to you if you don't negotiate.
Right. Well, you can have that even if you don't have MTA STS.
Right.
That's why I say that's kind of a...
Probably this should say something about that too, that there's the results of this is a different kind of negotiation, and you're going to get an end result that is either, okay, I'll talk to you even though you didn't use TLS, but I don't like it, to simply a refusal to communicate. And that should probably be mentioned here, because you say it's expected that this directive will generally be followed, and I think that's a little too strong.
Yeah,
that is up to the receiving system.
Ned Fried again. If we want to make it possible for a server to say, I only accept messages over TLS, don't bother trying anything else, then we need to define a mechanism to say that, because we don't have one now.
Yeah, I just want to say to Victor, you're fourth in the queue right now.
Ben Kaduk. I think Barry kind of stole my thunder, but this bit at the end about it being expected that this directive will be followed, I'm not sure how comfortable I am with that.
I struggled with what word to put there, so I just put something there. So yeah, I agree that might be problematic.
Watson from Cloudflare.
I think you got to eat the mic.
Oh, Watson from Cloudflare. So maybe I'm being a little too pedantic, but I think part of the discuss was about the fact that TLS required always is no.
Yes.
And that's a little bit interesting. Unintuitive.
Oh, yeah. Well, the positive way of saying TLS required we do through the SMTP extension, of course, instead. And there's a reason for that, is because you can actually you want to make sure that you've got a continuous chain, and so doing that in the SMTP in the SMTP path is the right place to do it. TLS required no, we had to do it with a header field instead, because even if there are some places in the middle that don't implement TLS required, we want to be able to propagate that further on in the chain in that direction.
Joe Salloway, Tableau. I think, with respect to if TLS required is no, as long as it's, I think it would be unfortunate if a server that, had to respect that and say, oh, I'm not going to use TLS because this message said, even though the server may have a policy to enforce TLS. So, and the way this is worded, I'm not clear.
Yeah, so I think Barry pointed out the wording error here, which is decision not to use TLS. It's a decision not to require TLS. You can still use TLS. We encourage people to use TLS. It's just that if there's something that's saying you got to use, we really want you to use TLS or something like that, you have more freedom to ignore that.
And I think the last sentence may be problematic as well.
Oh yeah.
Ben, I brought that up. Ben brought that up. My suggestion for the last sentence is simply to remove the word since and stop the sentence after the word mechanism.
All right, so I got.
Or remove the sentence entirely.
All right, Ben.
I think I needed something to close that paragraph better.
All right, hang on. You're up, Victor.
I think Jim just mostly made my point, which is it seems some folks aren't catching that require TLS no isn't require no TLS. And so it's as interoperable as mail is today for agents who have no special policy, neither support for DANE nor support for MTA STS, but are still capable of doing opportunistic TLS and do it 92 to 93% of the time if we look at the Gmail statistics, right? The bulk of internet email, actually more than the webs, in fact, by a good margin, is actually using TLS. It's just not authenticating and not required. So require TLS no is not the same as require no TLS. The words don't quite commute. And maybe that can be even clearer. I think we're trying to make it clear. But in the room, that still seems to be an assumption that if a server requires TLS, somehow this won't interoperate with them. But it absolutely will. What the server won't know and can't know is whether its certificate got checked. There's no mechanism in TLS for a client to convince the server that it checked its certificate, and none is.
That's what the discussion has been, and that's why we're picking on the word use in the in Jim's proposed.
Yeah,
text.
I definitely muddied the water there in a way I didn't intend.
So as an individual, I think that the fact that we're having this discussion in the room is exactly the reason we need to have that clarification text, because this is exactly why the IST sort of started looping on this, right? So.
Ben Kadek again. With respect to Victor's point, I'm pretty sure I'm not one of the people that's confused about this. And then getting back to the sort of last sentence on the slide and Barry's suggestion, I think it's a little bit more subtle than just saying that TLS required is the more fine-grained mechanism. Yes, it's fine-grained in that it's at a per message level, but it's also sender preference. And the DANE and MTA STS are recipient preference, and yes, they are more coarse-grained, but it's sort of a trade-off or a tussle between do we honor the sender preference or do we honor the recipient preference? And maybe we can't really mandate one over the other, but they're in conflict and they're sort of from qualitatively different spaces. And yeah, that's like a hard question to have.
Right. This is Barry. I agree with that. So maybe the whole fine grain thing isn't the right answer. I mean, my sense of the best thing to do in general is to negotiate the stronger security option. If either side wants TLS, you use TLS.
Oh, and we still do that.
Yeah, it can be done. The point is, if I'm looking at a sent message, hey Victor, if I'm looking at a sent message that says I don't want to require TLS, and a recipient that says I do, I would not say, well, I'll believe the sender because it's a per message fine grained thing. I would say I'm going to use TLS because the recipient wants to use it. And this could be because the recipient knows they're being monitored by the government or something like that.
Well, but I guess the question here has a little bit to do, and maybe we're going to get into the weeds a little bit too much, but a little bit to do with the semantics of DANE and MTA-STS as to whether those semantics are saying, I do want to, I do want to require the use of TLS, in which case they should not be accepting messages from agents that don't, right now they're accepting mail from agents that don't implement DANE and MTA-STS and don't necessarily negotiate it. I don't think that's what they mean.
So MTA-STS definitely is saying, I require TLS. That's what strict means in that. But what they're saying is the sender is saying, maybe I support TLS, but I don't want to require it for this message. And the recipient is saying, I require TLS for everybody who connects to me. And the result is you have to use TLS.
So if they use strict, are they also required to not accept messages if start TLS isn't negotiated?
The implication is that they won't.
I'm going to let Victor in now.
I think that was Barry last, right?
Yes.
Sorry.
Yeah. So the word strict in MTA-STS is only there by analogy with HSTS, and the analogy is far from accurate in many ways. And indeed, there is no actual requirement to use TLS in MTA-STS for senders who are not currently employing MTA-STS. MTA-STS defines how to follow all of the precepts and laws of TLS for senders who are playing the game. What this specification does is allow a sender to act as a sender who is not playing the game. MTA-STS does not mandate the use of TLS by all senders who are doing email. It cannot and does not do that, and I think that was clear in some of the mailing list discussion. There is no generally in the draft, you must do this if you support MTA-STS generally. The spec quite clearly says, if you're doing MTA-STS, this is how you must do it. But there's an if, and it's qualified. These are advertisement mechanisms that are trying to encourage the internet to be resistant to active attack.
We understand.
Yeah, and so when the sender chooses to not do it, they're not doing so because of an attack. They're doing so because of the content of the message that's coming along. So that's one point.
We continue to understand.
Yes, that's good.
Victor, we have a queue.
I'm not sure that everybody in the room is necessarily on the same page, Barry. So I'm sure you understand that, and that's cool. That's great.
All right, thank you, Victor. I'm gonna let Pete. Victor, I'm gonna let Pete get up there because we're running out of time now.
Bring me back, I guess.
Yeah, absolutely. If you have additional points that are different from this, but we need to get on with this now.
Pete Resnick, I find what I'm going to say stupid, but I'm going to say it anyway. That there is no conflict, obviously, we all know, between TLS required no and I'm requiring TLS by the recipient. And maybe this is some semantic goofiness that people just are getting wrapped around the name of the header and call it TLS optional yes. and people will be fine. I find the whole thing goofy that people are even having this discussion. So if that wording is confusing people, switch the name.
Also, note the fact that we're talking about security considerations. This is not necessarily normative language, right? So we're just giving guidance to implementers, right? So I think, let's continue wordsmithing this on the list. I assume you're going to post this to the list, and we can.
I'll post this text to the list.
Yeah.
Maybe we can wordsmith it a bit before I do the updated draft.
Yeah, exactly. But again, we're talking about guidance, not normative language. Do you have anything else?
That was it.
Actually, all right. Well, you get 5 seconds, Victor.
So the last thing I want to say is that we should all remember that email is basically a large UDP datagram carried over TCP. It's a one-way message from the sender with all of the issues that carries. And so the sender knows far more about the context than any recipient. The senders already implement all kinds of policy based on message content in terms of message routing and selection of gateways and so on. And selecting a policy that user doesn't use what TLS is no different than selecting all kinds of policies on the sender side in terms of routing and delivering the message.
Right, Victor. And I think that the trick here is to get all of that wisdom condensed into the security consideration section, so we can get past the IST. So I think, and Victor, just for the record, you spent a lot of time, right, on that thread trying to sort of get this message across, and we just need to put this in text. So appreciate all the help. All right. That puts us at, I think, Hannes, but do we have slides from you? No, we don't have slides. All right, fuck it. Let's, okay.
Test. So I submitted, test, hi, this is Hannes. I submitted the document to the group, to the UTAC group, and the background is the following. A while ago, years ago, I was working with Thomas Fossati and others in the DICE working group to define a profile for TLS and DTLS 1.2 for use in IoT environments. And it, as you know, TLS 1.2 and DTLS 1.2, there were lots of extensions, and some of them, if you use them incorrectly, they didn't lead to the desired results. And also for IoT, there were some additional extensions. So the document outlined what to do in the specific cases. Now we are at 1.3, and of course, 1.3 is a much better protocol in terms of security and performance and everything. However, it leaves two aspects to profiles. Namely, one is the choice of algorithms. It makes a default algorithm choice, which is great for the web. And the other thing is, it also requires a profile that describes on what protocol application protocol you use TLS and DTLS 1.3 with for use of the zero RTD functionality. And guys have worked on such a profile for HTTP usage. I think that's whatever group, doesn't matter. And in this document, I'm actually putting those two functions in there. Currently, there's not much else besides that. I envision in the future, as we gain more experience with implementations in the IoT field, we'll provide additionally some guidance on how to use certain features in an IoT context to provide better flash optimization over the air bandwidth reduction, or also sort of to lower RAM usage. So that's the purpose of the document. That's why I submitted it to this group. The DICE group doesn't exist anymore. Otherwise, I would have sent it there. But I think this group is also good for that purpose, because there was this prior work on the best current practices for TLS 1.2 and the algorithms that came along with it. So I think it fits nicely in here. Although the IED community isn't yet here, but I think there can be cross sort of working group postings. So that was the intention. And
are you looking for this to be a working group document?
yeah, that would be nice. And to find some reviewers in this group, or in general some reviewers. I can obviously target some individuals who I know who are working on this. So we are currently wrapping up DTLS 1.3, and sort of TLS, as you know, 1.3 has been finalized, but its usage in an IoT environment is still early days, because it takes a little bit longer to write these embedded, somewhat optimized stacks. So I expect this document to stick around for maybe a little longer. Even though it's simple, I don't think it's anywhere near to completion yet. So I don't know if that's a
Can I check who has anybody in the room read it? Hands up who has read this document. Right. One problem, I mean, we might have, is that sort of the people in this room are typically expect to see things related to email current trade, because that's sort of where the working group is. Now, I think in order to like make a successful like import of this document, we got to have like the right reviewers and the right people in the room. So I think what would help is if you could help us find reviewers who could actually turn up on the mailing list saying, yeah, we read it, looks interesting, we want to adopt it as a working group document, right? Because that actually gives us sort of the reason to like push on this. All right, excellent. Review volunteer from Barry, excellent, thank you. And Alexei?
Yeah, it was just this is up to the chairs to decide how you want, when and if you want to adopt the document and the process you want to use. But are you looking for reviewers first on the mailing list?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, clearly this is, but this is sort of in scope for the work for the working group.
I think it's charter-wise, it's
yeah, I think
fine.
it's fine charter-wise, but
or maybe you just want to start the adoption call and then try to prod people and up to you.
I think it's a good idea for a working group to know that it can complete the work before like taking on something, and like having like a couple of people who've reviewed something indicates a level of interest that actually makes it likely that we can do this.
There's a second reviewer in the Jabber room. Loganaden.
All right. If you guys can review the volunteers review and also send an email to the list saying, yes, I've reviewed this document. It looks crappy, fine, good, bad, whatever, right? Just anything is good.
Yeah, it's a short document.
Yeah. This is what you're volunteering.
Yeah, it's not.
Hannes, and you said you can cross post.
Yeah. Yeah, we'll talk to.
Right.
It's
a mailing list where you said if you want to comment on this, please come here and post.
And I think if you compare this with the 1.2 version, it's obviously very short, and I think that's a good thing. Simply because many of the issues that we talked about in the 1.2 case just simply went away. So I think that's we fix things. Yeah.
All right. That's it. I think that's open mic then, right?
So if anybody has any questions, so we have a few minutes for open mic. And otherwise, there are blue sheets on the chair's table.
Has anybody not signed the blue sheet? All right. Go ahead. Come up here and do that. I think we're done.
Yeah.
In that case, thank you very much for coming. We will see you all next time. I will get that turned in.